She has been taking notes methodically about your marriage for years. That's a threat, by the way. That's the threat to William. That's the threat to Charles. That's the threat to Catherine. That's the threat to the British royal family. But wake up, Prince Harry, because that's the threat to you too.
Harry doesn't seem to understand that his life is going to be forever changed once he decides to do what he wants to.
That's not just a threat to Prince Harry. That's a threat to Prince William. A threat to King Charles. A threat to Catherine, Princess of Wales, and to the future of the monarchy itself. Because while the world thought Meghan Markle had moved on, new revelations suggest she may have been quietly documenting everything. Every conversation, every argument, every private royal moment, for years.
Yeah, that's exactly what is going to happen. Harry doesn't seem to understand that his life is going to be forever changed once he decides to do what he wants to do. And I know that is to no longer stay in California and to have his life back. And the minute he takes that step, that's when the threat, that's when the risk to his own life and that of his own family, the reputation becomes at stake, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Meghan has been documenting for years everything.
For years, Prince Harry believed the greatest threats to his family were coming from outside the palace gates, from intrusive photographers, hostile headlines, anonymous palace briefings, and a media machine he had spent most of his adult life blaming for the pain that followed him from childhood into adulthood, but according to deeply unsettling new claims now circulating through both Hollywood and royal circles. The most dangerous archive of all may have been sitting quietly beside him at the breakfast table, traveling beside him on private jets, walking beside him through California gardens, and sleeping only a few feet away from him every single night. Because what insiders are now describing is not emotional journaling, not harmless voice memos, and certainly not the occasional personal note that anyone might keep during difficult times inside a marriage.
Dominique Hines. Now, she has been a sort of offbeat showbiz reporter in the United Kingdom for years. I know her. I don't particularly trust a lot of her work, but you will notice she's black. And so what they have now done is got her to do a pro-Meghan and Harry propaganda piece briefed by Harry and Meghan to try and turn this situation into some type of race war, suggesting that Black Hollywood is right behind Meghan Markle and that she has the biggest power brokers in Black Hollywood, Oprah Winfrey and Shonda Rhimes, totally supporting her.
But something far more calculated, far more disciplined, and, if even partially true, far more devastating than anything Buckingham Palace has prepared for since the Sussex departure. Sources close to publishing executives in California now claim that Meghan Markle has spent years building what one insider privately described as a living archive, a detailed collection of voice notes, private recollections, emotional timestamps, handwritten observations, and carefully preserved memories allegedly recorded in real time, often immediately after emotionally charged conversations, family disagreements, public controversies, and deeply personal moments that no one outside the marriage was ever supposed to hear about. And what makes these allegations so unsettling for Prince Harry is not simply the existence of those notes, but the timing attached to them, because according to one publishing contact familiar with early discussions, some of those recordings were allegedly made in the early hours of the morning, sometimes after tense arguments, sometimes after difficult calls, and sometimes after moments when Harry believed the night had ended in private understanding.
And even Meghan Markle's mother, Doria Ragland. So what is so hilarious about this, right, is that like, oh God, we need black people. We need black famous people supporting Meghan. Okay, Tyler Perry, yep, they're not talking anymore, but he's sort of their Gayle King. We all know about that. Oh, and I know Meghan's mum. Meghan's mum. Because do you notice, every single person that they are saying support Meghan in this article is a black person. They're not talking about anyone in Meghan's world who is white. So that's why I believe there is a race undertone here.
While somewhere in another room, another version of that same night may have been preserved forever. Inside royal circles, that possibility alone changes everything, because the monarchy does not function on contracts, cameras, or public declarations nearly as much as it functions on trust, on centuries of private conversations held behind closed doors, on difficult family meetings that never become public property, and on the unspoken understanding that whatever happens inside those rooms remains inside those rooms. But if even a fraction of those conversations were quietly documented by someone who was already thinking several moves ahead, then every handshake, every emotional reconciliation, every uncomfortable family discussion, and every carefully managed peace offering made since 2017 may now exist not only as memory, but as potential material.
I can reveal it was Oprah who encouraged Meghan and Harry to attend Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party on November the 8th last year. A lavish James Bond-themed soiree at Amazon boss Jeff Bezos' Beverly Hills mansion. The goal was for Meghan to rub shoulders with key power players, including Bezos himself. After the event, however, the couple famously requested the removal of photos posted online by Kim Kardashian and Jenner. Publicly, sources cited sensitivity around Remembrance Day in the UK, but I'm told it wasn't just that. The truth is, the Sussexes still want to be seen as above the celebrity fray. I mean, okay, pause. Are you kidding me? This is, again, so stupid. You're hanging out at a celebrity party where there are paparazzi outside, and then you're saying that you want to drop the photos from all the picture agencies because you want to be above the celebrity fray. You are crazy, okay?
And that is where Prince Harry's position becomes far more complicated than most people realize. Because while the public has spent years debating whether he was manipulated, isolated, protected, or simply blinded by love, people close to the situation now believe Harry may be facing a far darker reality, one in which every disagreement, every frustration, every private criticism of his father, his brother, and even his own marriage may have become part of a larger story that he never realized was being written in real time. Not after the marriage ended, not after relationships collapsed, not after memoir deals were signed, but while he was still living it, while he was still defending it, and while he still believed he understood exactly who was standing beside him. And if that sounds dramatic, what happens next may be even more difficult for Harry to accept, because according to people now watching this story unfold from inside both publishing and entertainment circles, these recordings were never meant to remain private forever. They may have been the beginning of something much bigger, something carefully timed, commercially structured, and powerful enough not just to damage relationships, but to shake the institution Harry once swore he would protect for the rest of his life.
To support her based on race and to get money, that's going to be the end. I'm sorry. It's going to be horrible for the monarchy. Just horrible because of what they will do and what they will say and the media campaign behind that. It's going to be frightening. I mean, Meghan is going to do horrible things to Harry. I just know it. Why would she be keeping all these things, these receipts, if you didn't have the intention of using it one day? I mean, it's so cutthroat, Dan. We look at what she's doing to her father, who's done everything for her, and we think, how could you do this? If she could do this to her father, imagine what she's going to do to Harry and the monarchy.
What makes this story even more unsettling is that the alleged recordings themselves may only be the first layer of a far larger operation. Because according to multiple entertainment insiders now speaking quietly across Los Angeles, Montecito, and executive offices inside some of the most powerful media circles in America, Meghan Markle's long-rumored publishing project is no longer being discussed as a simple memoir, or even as another celebrity tell-all designed to dominate a few headlines, before disappearing into the next news cycle, but as something far more ambitious, far more carefully engineered, and potentially far more damaging than Prince Harry's own memoir ever became. And the reason people inside those circles are suddenly taking it so seriously is because this project, if the reports are accurate, was never designed to live on a single bookshelf. One publishing source with knowledge of early discussions now claims that what Meghan has allegedly been building for years is a multi-platform narrative, a story designed not to arrive once, but to arrive everywhere, in stages, with each release feeding the next, each headline driving audiences toward a bigger reveal, and each emotional disclosure opening the door to a more commercially valuable chapter. The book itself, according to that source, is only the foundation, the first controlled detonation, the moment designed to put private memories into the public record while still leaving enough unanswered questions to keep audiences hungry for what comes next. And if that sounds familiar, Prince Harry may already know exactly how powerful that strategy can be, because he watched what happened when his own interviews, documentaries, and memoir combined into a global media storm that kept his family on the defensive for months. But this time, according to people now watching the situation closely, the material may be even stronger, because Harry's memoir relied heavily on memory, on emotional interpretation, on stories told years after the events themselves had taken place, while this alleged project, if insiders are telling the truth, may rely on something entirely different, something much harder to challenge, much harder to dismiss, and much harder for Buckingham Palace to quietly survive. Real-time recordings. Time-stamped voice notes. Emotional reactions captured within minutes of the events themselves. Conversations preserved before memory had a chance to soften them, before lawyers had a chance to edit them, and before royal advisors had a chance to contain the damage. And suddenly, people in Hollywood are beginning to ask a very uncomfortable question. If the archive really exists, who exactly has already heard it? Because behind the scenes, some of the most influential names in American entertainment are now being quietly linked to Meghan's inner circle, and whether those connections are personal, strategic, or purely commercial, the implications are enormous. Oprah Winfrey, the woman who helped launch the Sussex's most explosive public chapter in 2021, is once again being mentioned in connection with private conversations about future storytelling opportunities. Shonda Rhimes, one of the most powerful creative forces in streaming television, reportedly remains connected through overlapping Netflix relationships. And figures tied to executive circles surrounding Netflix are now being whispered about in the same conversations, not because deals have been publicly announced, but because people inside the industry understand exactly what kind of commercial gold private royal recordings could become. And that is the moment this story stops being celebrity gossip and starts becoming a genuine institutional concern, because Buckingham Palace has spent decades preparing for unauthorized biographies, media leaks, angry interviews, disgruntled former staff, and even family memoirs written by insiders who wanted revenge. But preparing for a structured content pipeline built around years of privately documented material is something entirely different. That is not a tabloid problem. That is not a public relations setback. That is a long-term reputational threat, one capable of reopening old wounds, creating new headlines every few weeks, and dragging the monarchy back into controversies it believed had already been buried. And somewhere in the middle of all of this sits Prince Harry, increasingly isolated, increasingly photographed alone, increasingly described by friends as reflective, nostalgic, and quietly torn between the life he built in California and the life he walked away from in Britain. Because if these reports are true, Harry may now be facing the most painful realization of all, that the story he thought he was helping tell may never have been his story to control in the first place. And if Prince Harry is only now beginning to understand the scale of what may have been quietly unfolding around him, the next part of this story may be the one that forces him to confront a reality far more personal than any headline, documentary, or public controversy he has faced since leaving Britain, because according to people watching the Sussex Circle from both Hollywood and royal networks, the most dangerous material in this alleged archive may not involve King Charles, Prince William, or even private palace discussions at all, but the marriage itself, the arguments nobody saw, the emotional breakdowns nobody heard, the late-night frustrations nobody was ever meant to witness, and the private moments Harry may have believed disappeared the moment the lights went out. One publishing insider now claims that some of the most valuable material being discussed behind closed doors allegedly comes from voice notes recorded in the early hours of the morning, sometimes after emotional disagreements, sometimes after difficult conversations about money, family, public image, and long-term plans, and sometimes after moments when both husband and wife believed the outside world would never know what had really happened behind those California doors. If even part of that claim is accurate, then what Harry once considered private marital conflict may now exist as organized source material, emotionally raw, chronologically preserved, and commercially valuable in ways few people inside royal history have ever had to imagine. And for people close to the monarchy, that possibility changes the entire equation, because Prince Harry's memoir may have shocked the institution, his interviews may have embarrassed it, and the Netflix documentaries may have frustrated it, but those projects still relied on memory, perspective, and emotional interpretation, all things that can be challenged, questioned, or reframed over time. Audio is different. Time-stamped recordings are different. Emotional reactions captured in the exact moment of pain, frustration, or betrayal are different. They do not merely tell a story. They create the illusion that audiences are hearing the truth exactly as it happened, and in media, that illusion can be more powerful than reality itself. But the deeper question now being asked inside royal circles is not whether such material exists. The deeper question is why it may have been collected in the first place. Because people who have followed Meghan Markle's public journey from actress to duchess to media entrepreneur have noticed something remarkably consistent about the way she builds influence, the way she protects leverage, and the way she positions herself long before the public understands where the story is going. Friends become strategic contacts. Private relationships become public narratives. Personal struggles become branded moments. And now, according to people close to the publishing world, years of private documentation may represent not emotional survival, but strategic insurance, A carefully assembled record designed to guarantee that no matter how the marriage evolves, no matter who walks away first, and no matter which side controls the headlines in the beginning, the final version of the story can still be shaped by the person holding the archive. And that may be the moment Harry's position becomes almost impossible to escape, because if he stays, the archive allegedly continues to grow, more conversations, more arguments, more frustrations, more moments of vulnerability quietly added to a collection that may already stretch across years. But if he leaves, if he attempts to rebuild his life, reconnect with Britain, repair his relationship with his father, or even begin a private separation, then according to people who understand how modern media warfare works, the commercial value of that archive could increase overnight. Separation creates headlines. Headlines create demand. And demand creates leverage. Which is exactly why people close to Prince William's camp are said to be watching this story with increasing concern, not simply as brothers hurt by public betrayal, but as future protectors of an institution that has survived abdications, scandals, affairs, leaked phone calls, and generational crises, yet now faces a threat that feels uniquely modern, uniquely digital, and uniquely difficult to contain. Because in an era where one voice memo can become a global headline, one interview can reshape public memory, and one carefully timed release can dominate international news for weeks, the greatest royal threat may no longer come from palace rivals, political enemies, or hostile newspapers, but from a phone that may have been recording all along. And if that possibility sounds dramatic, the reality now taking shape behind the scenes may be even more unsettling. Because according to people moving quietly between publishing houses, streaming executives, public relations advisors, and celebrity power circles in Southern California, the alleged archive itself may never have been intended to stand alone as a private insurance policy or a personal emotional record, but as the foundation of something much larger, something strategically timed, commercially layered, and powerful enough to dominate not just royal headlines for a weekend, but global entertainment cycles for months. Because what insiders are increasingly describing is not a memoir in the traditional sense, not a simple book tour followed by a few carefully selected interviews, but a coordinated content pipeline, a modern media operation designed to unfold in phases, with each phase amplifying the next, each revelation driving new audiences toward a bigger platform, and each emotional disclosure increasing both public pressure and commercial value. One executive familiar with how celebrity memoirs are packaged for global rollout recently described the alleged strategy in language that should make Buckingham Palace deeply uncomfortable, because according to that source, the written memoir may only be the opening move. The controlled release designed to place the most emotionally explosive claims into the public record while still holding back enough unseen material to create demand for what follows. The second phase, according to people now watching these conversations closely, would be the interview event. The moment a trusted media ally sits across from Meghan Markle in a carefully lit environment, asks the questions millions of viewers already believe they know the answers to, and then allows the emotion, the pauses, the tears, the silence, and the carefully chosen revelations to transform written allegations into living television. And after that, if the strategy truly follows the pattern now being whispered about in Hollywood, the final phase becomes streaming, a multi-part documentary adaptation designed not merely to repeat the book, but to deepen it, visualize it, dramatize it, and place audiences emotionally inside every private moment that once existed only behind palace walls. And suddenly, the names being connected to those conversations begin to explain why people inside both Hollywood and Britain are paying attention. Oprah Winfrey, whose original Sussex interview reshaped global headlines in 2021, is once again being quietly mentioned as the natural interviewer of record, not because any deal has been publicly confirmed, but because the relationship, the trust, and the audience history already exist. Shonda Rhimes remains one of the most influential creative voices inside the streaming ecosystem, and her proximity to senior executive circles has not gone unnoticed by industry observers. And around those names sits the enormous gravitational pull of Netflix, a platform that understands better than almost anyone how emotionally charged personal stories can become subscriber-driving global events when packaged with enough exclusivity, enough access, and enough controversy. For Buckingham Palace, this is where the threat stops looking like family drama and starts looking like something far more dangerous. Because institutions know how to survive headlines, they know how to survive gossip, and they even know how to survive memoirs written by angry insiders. But surviving a multi-platform narrative built around years of time-stamped emotional material is a completely different challenge. A book can be denied. A newspaper story can be ignored. A controversial interview can be countered through silence and disciplined appearances. But a coordinated release that arrives as a best-selling memoir then becomes an emotional primetime interview, then evolves into a global streaming event watched by millions across multiple countries creates something much harder to defeat. It creates repetition. It creates visual memory. It creates emotional reinforcement. And once audiences emotionally experience a story 3 different ways, truth itself often becomes secondary to narrative. That is why, according to sources close to royal advisors, conversations about strategic distance from Harry have allegedly become far more serious in recent months. Not because anyone inside the palace suddenly stopped loving him, and not because reconciliation is impossible, but because institutions do not wait for damage to become public before building defensive walls. They prepare quietly. They reduce exposure. They limit access. They create smaller circles. They protect future conversations by controlling who gets invited into them. And if Harry himself has begun noticing colder responses, delayed invitations, shorter private calls, or increasingly formal communication from people who once treated him as family before anything else, the reason may have far less to do with anger than with risk management. Because from Prince William's perspective, this is no longer simply about brotherly disappointment. This is about the future king asking a deeply uncomfortable question. If private conversations from the past may already exist in someone else's archive, what happens if new conversations become tomorrow's headlines? What happens if attempts at reconciliation become chapter titles? What happens if moments of forgiveness become documentary cliffhangers? And what happens if the brother you still love walks into the room carrying no phone in his hand, while nobody can be absolutely certain what may already be stored somewhere else? And that same question may now be haunting King Charles in ways the public will never fully see, because for a father already managing his own health, the pressures of the crown, constitutional responsibilities, and the emotional burden of holding a fractured family together under global scrutiny, the possibility that every private effort to repair the relationship could someday become monetized content is not merely painful. It is destabilizing. Because fathers speak differently behind closed doors than kings do. Fathers apologize. Fathers reveal fear. Fathers confess regret. Fathers say things institutions were never meant to hear. And if even a portion of those conversations may now exist outside palace protection, then the emotional cost becomes almost impossible to calculate. Which brings this story back to Prince Harry himself, because people close to the wider royal orbit now believe he may be approaching the most emotionally dangerous realization of his adult life, the realization that the greatest trap is not public criticism, not tabloid attacks, not social media commentary, and not even family tension, but discovering that the most valuable story in the room may have been his own life, his own marriage, his own pain, and his own private words, and someone else may have been preparing to tell it long before he realized the recording had already begun. And if Prince Harry is beginning to see that possibility more clearly now than ever before, the most painful part of the story may not be what happens when the alleged archive finally becomes public, or when the interviews begin, or when the streaming cameras start rolling, but what happens in the quiet moments before any of that ever takes place. Because according to people who continue to monitor both the California circle surrounding the Sussex household and the increasingly cautious atmosphere developing around senior royal advisors in Britain, the real battle may already be underway, not in public, not in headlines, and not on camera, but inside Harry's own mind, where the man who once believed he had finally escaped institutional control may now be asking whether he has simply walked into a different kind of system, one built not around ancient tradition, but around modern leverage, personal branding, and the extraordinary commercial power of private pain. Over the past several months, something else has quietly started drawing attention from royal watchers, entertainment commentators, and even people who have defended Harry through some of his most controversial decisions, and it is not what he has been saying, but what he has not been saying. The interviews have become less frequent. The public appearances feel more carefully managed. The spontaneous energy that once defined his California reinvention appears increasingly restrained, increasingly reflective, and at times almost disconnected, as if the man who once seemed determined to tell the world exactly how he felt is now measuring every sentence, every gesture, every facial expression, and every unscripted moment with a level of caution that did not exist during the first years after his departure from Britain. For some observers, that is maturity. For others, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like a man who has started to understand that in a world where everything can become content, even silence has value. And people close to the wider royal orbit believe that may be exactly why Prince William, despite the public distance, despite the years of frustration, despite the interviews, the memoir, and the accusations that shook the monarchy to its core, has never completely shut the door on his younger brother. Because William understands something few people outside institutional leadership truly understand. He understands that betrayal and vulnerability are not always the same thing. He understands that someone can make deeply damaging choices while still being trapped inside circumstances the outside world cannot fully see. And perhaps most importantly, he understands that if Harry is ever going to find his way back, emotionally, privately, or even symbolically, that journey will not begin with headlines, cameras, or public apologies. It will begin the moment Harry finally asks himself one devastating question. Was I ever truly telling my story? Or was I helping build someone else's? That question becomes even heavier when people close to the situation begin pointing toward a pattern that now feels impossible to ignore. Relationships that once appeared emotionally permanent have gradually become professionally useful. Private conflicts have repeatedly transformed into public narratives. Family pain has become documentary material. Personal struggles have become speaking engagements, podcast themes, memoir chapters, streaming episodes, and global branding opportunities. And when observers step back and examine that pattern as a whole rather than as isolated moments, the picture that emerges is not emotional chaos. It is strategy. It is sequencing. It is patience. And if the alleged archive truly exists, then what many dismissed as random emotional reactions over the past several years may one day look less like spontaneous disclosures and more like carefully preserved assets waiting for the right commercial moment. Inside Buckingham Palace, according to people familiar with institutional thinking, the concern is no longer whether another public revelation is coming. The concern is timing. Timing determines market value. Timing determines emotional impact. Timing determines how much damage a story can do before any response is even possible. Release something during a family celebration, and it becomes distraction. Release something during a constitutional transition, and it becomes instability. Release something during a health crisis, and it becomes emotional pressure on an institution already under strain. That is why senior advisors are believed to be watching every movement, every new industry rumor, every private Hollywood dinner, every publishing whisper, and every unexplained shift inside the Sussex media machine with a level of seriousness that rarely becomes visible to the public. And if all of that sounds like palace paranoia, people in Hollywood may be the ones quietly confirming that the threat is very real, because executives understand something royal families often learn too late. The most powerful stories are not built around facts alone. They are built around access. Access to tears. Access to arguments. Access to regret. Access to moments nobody else was supposed to witness. And if audiences are ever made to believe they are hearing Prince Harry's pain exactly as it happened, exactly as it was spoken, exactly as it was recorded in the middle of sleepless nights and emotional confrontations, then the commercial value of that material could become almost impossible to resist. Which leaves Prince Harry standing at what may be the most defining crossroads of his life, not as the rebellious prince, not as the soldier, not as the best-selling author, and not even as the man who walked away from the institution that shaped him, but as a husband, a father, and a son who may soon have to decide whether the life he built was truly freedom, or simply the opening chapter of a story someone else had been documenting from the very beginning. And if that day really comes, if the recordings emerge, if the memoir becomes reality, if the interviews begin, and if the world once again turns its eyes toward the House of Windsor, one question may define everything that follows. Will Prince Harry fight for the story, or fight to take his life back? What do you think? Is Harry finally seeing the bigger picture, or is he already too deep to walk away without consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoy deeply researched royal stories, insider analysis, and the hidden power struggles shaping the future of the monarchy, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because this story may only just be beginning.